All right. So, hello everyone, and welcome to another episode of the Aware Athlete Show. I'm your host, Scott Forrester, and today's guest is Anne Audain. Anne, do you have anything else on, any sound on? Or?
No, got nothing else. Everything's clear.
Okay. I'm going to go ahead and turn off my phone, too. All right. So today's guest is Anne Audain, and Anne has overcome adversity in many forms on her way to running a world record time in the 5,000 meters in 1982, I believe, winning a gold medal in the 1982 Commonwealth Games in the 3,000 meters, and she's been inducted into the USA Running Hall of Fame and the New Zealand Sports Hall of Fame. So that's not where her story ends. She was also the first female professional runner in the world. And she has the most road racing victories in the U.S. between the time of 1981 and 1991. She completely dominated the sport in those years. So her athletic story is very inspiring, and I also to be able to touch on what she's done since the peak of her athletic career. So very pleased to have you on today, Anne. Thank you so much.
Thank you for having me.
Yeah. So can you give our audience a little background? How was it, what formative things happened as you were growing up? You had an interesting place to grow up. New Zealand.
Yes, well, I was born in Auckland, New Zealand, and I was given up for adoption by a teenage mom and adopted by a great couple who had struggled to have children of their own. And I always look back and say that I have since met all my birth family and my birth parents, and the first thing that came out of their mouths was that I was meant to be adopted, that I was raised by a great couple, and that they probably couldn't have done for me what my adopted parents did. And so saying that, my dad started off as an errand boy at New Zealand's major newspaper, the New Zealand Herald, at the age of 14, and eventually worked his way up 45 years to be the head printer of the New Zealand Herald. So he was a one-man job for all those years.
Wow.
And my mum was a homemaker. They actually had a daughter of their own 3.5 years after adopting me. And Katie was born very, very premature in 1959, and both Mum and her almost died. And so at that point, Mum just decided that, you know, Katie, she just had to stay home and take care of Katie and raise Katie. So in terms of my mum and dad and my grandmother on my father's side, I look back, I mean, it's all hindsight, but I look at all of them, and my mum just was as tough as could be in terms of overcoming so many things that nothing ever got her down. Very positive person. My dad was really into education and work ethic. He even taught me to read quite well before I even started school. And then my grandmother lived in a little cottage on an island 25 miles off the coast of Auckland City. Tiny little cottage, and maybe only 1,000 people lived on the island back then, and no running water, no electricity. She lived a very, very simple life, and while Mum was going through all the struggles with Katie, I was sent down there to live with her. And I think that learning what a very simple life was all about at a very young age really helped me to be a professional athlete, and the discipline I needed to live a very simple life as a professional athlete to get the best out of myself.
Right. So with a simple life like that, you didn't have a lot of distractions from being outside and enjoying running.
Well, it's true. I mean, the other thing was that I was born with bone deformities of both my feet, and I didn't walk very well as a child, and I was always in a lot of pain. So being able to go down to an island close to a sandy beach and be with my grandmother was just a joy. And also being able to just be able to go down on the sand and swim. It was just great freedom being down there and out of the city.
Yeah. So tell us a little bit about the trouble that you did have with your feet early on and later.
Well, I was really fortunate recently, because there is a documentary being done that we were able to find the doctor, the surgeon that actually did the surgery on my feet. I was just born with a bone deformity that just grew worse as I grew, and it stopped me from being able to get up on the front part of my feet. I just wouldn't do it because it was just too painful, and I hated shoes because I couldn't fit the bone deformity into the shoes. And so my dad, in the summertime, I mean, fortunately, Auckland's a pretty mild climate, so in the summertime I went barefoot as much as I could, and in the wintertime we got slippers, and he would cut a hole in the side of the slippers so that there was no pressure on the bone. And so the doctors decided they weren't going to do surgery until I was a teenager, until my bones were strong enough to take the surgery. And so they waited until I was 13 years of age. So that caused me a lot of issues as a youngster because I couldn't participate in a great many things. I was in a lot of pain. I walked very awkwardly because I would not use the front part of my feet. So when I was 13 years old, only a few weeks before I was about to start high school, they told me that was time to actually go and do the surgery. And it was January of 1969, the middle of the New Zealand summer, when everybody was on holiday, vacation, and I had to go into hospital. So that was really frustrating as well. But finding that doctor, he describes it very, very well in terms of that his funny thing that he says in the documentary is that he would have done the surgery even if I'd been the biggest couch potato in the world, because it was to give me better mobility in life. Yeah. None of us knew at that point that I would end up where I did.
Yeah, absolutely. But it was such a big handicap that it would really influence the way you had to live. Yeah. So
it was, and I think that the genius in what they did was when I had the surgery, I had plaster casts on, and under the plaster casts, the stitches were still in my feet. And instead of giving me crutches or a wheelchair to leave the hospital, they created these these leather boots to attach. I mean, I know we get all these fancy boots these days. I think I had the first, I think I had the original pair. Yeah. But they were made of black leather, and on the bottom of them was a wooden rocker, like a rocking horse. And so what they wanted to do was force me up on my toes immediately. Their idea was that if I was just left in the casts and just using crutches or in a wheelchair, I would not have the confidence to use my feet once those casts came off. So their whole thing was to roll me forward immediately as my feet healed.
Oh. So
it caused me an awful lot of pain and a lot of swearing to those doctors. But what they did was create a miracle and gave me a great running style.
Yeah. So actually, as I understand it, forgive my cold here, but as I understand it, this was something very rare, and the surgeons that dealt with it had never seen anything like it, because it was quite a bit of extra bone growth on the metatarsal behind the large toe, then, or laterally on the side.
Yes, it would be classed as extreme bunions.
Yeah,
would be the way people could picture it. Yeah. But no, they had not seen it before.
Yeah. So I find that so interesting that they actually were thinking ahead back in those days, because now they would just probably put you in depending on who you dealt with, but probably put you in a protective boot and then just wait for physical therapy or something. But yeah, they were thinking ahead.
No, you're exactly right. Recently, I was out in Idaho and visiting at a hospital a young girl that I'd seen on Facebook that had surgery done on both her feet at age 11. And hers was the opposite. Hers was that when she started to walk, she only walked on her toes, she would not go down on her heels. And so they just done surgery recently to extend her Achilles tendon to force her to go down on her heels. And when I asked about what her situation was going to be, because she was in the casts up to her knees just like I was, they said, oh no, she's going to be in these for like 3 months, and then she's going to be in boots for such and such, and oh no, this is going to be a long haul. And in my mind I thought, boy, if she had my doctors, she'd be up and trying to go right now.
Yeah, isn't that something? Yeah, sometimes it's very debilitating just to wait and wait and wait, like he has to be off.
Well, I think so. I mean, my philosophy, just because of what I went through, is that if you can still be active, even if it might hurt, activity and getting blood flow, as long as you're not doing any damage, movement is very important. And when I see people, I mean, I badly sprained my ankle at an event about 4 years ago and fractured it slightly. It wasn't a weight-bearing bone. But anyway, I had to travel back from Green Bay, Wisconsin, so I got given a boot to try and navigate my way on the flights and everything. Well, those boots, when you got them on, got your foot 2 inches higher up than the other leg. And so if you're going to wear one of those for an extended time, you're going to create all sorts of other issues. And so as soon as I got home, I just went to my local doctor and I said, I'm not wearing this thing. As long as I can put my weight, I'm going to tolerate the soreness, and I've got to get this ankle moving again. And that's what I did, and I was back running in no time.
Yeah.
But that just came from experience of my childhood.
Yeah, so that's a great balance between taking really good care of the surgery and getting out there and getting after it again. Yeah. So at that point in your life, you're only 13 years old, and you go through a transformation from someone who it was awkward to even walk around, very awkward, and other kids, I'm sure, noticed that. You go through that transformation from that to all of a sudden discovering that you can move better than you ever thought you could. You could actually, you actually began to attempt to run, and you did run, and then began to find out that, wow, I can do that.
Well, I pretty much what they did, as I said, they gave me a great, I ran better than I walked. When I started off moving again, I actually got up on my toes, and it was better to run than it was, easier to run than it was to walk. And in New Zealand, all the sports are administered by a club system. So all my neighbors, the kids at school, they all belong to the local athletic club. And so once I found I could move, I just wanted to go and join the athletic club just like all the other kids. And the beauty also of New Zealand was that all the running tracks were grass. So I didn't even have to think about shoes by joining a running club. I just could go barefoot. And so I just joined a running club and just started running and jumping and just learning track and field. And I had no idea whatsoever, once again, when I joined, that I had any ability to be a runner.
So by the time you were 14, that began to change, though. You began to win or come place highly in races. Yeah. So
well, I started off in cross country, because in New Zealand, because it's a club system, you just run year round. So you've got cross country in the wintertime, some road racing in the spring, and then track and field season starts. So you run year round by being belonging to a club. You're not doing anything related to school in terms of, how everything in the United States is all school oriented. We were free to do anything we wanted. So I could go and run anywhere, anytime, race anybody. Just because I was 14 didn't mean I couldn't get into adult races. I could do anything I wanted. So I started to enter adult races against women. The adult was over 20. And so at 14, I started to race over 20 into the adult arena, and started beating some very good New Zealand women runners. And that's when my first coach saw me and asked if I wanted to join his coaching group, which was actually at the club that I belonged to. He just wanted to know whether I wanted to join the coaching group.
Yeah. So that was kind of a shock to you when you began to gather such recognition that he knocked on your parents' door one day.
Exactly. Yes, he wanted to coach me, and his name was Gordon Purry. He was British, had immigrated to New Zealand, and was an Olympic silver medalist himself in the 10,000 meters in the Zatopek era in the 1950s. So very accomplished. But as you've probably read in my book or watched the film, quite a colorful character.
Yeah.
Just kind of Jekyll and Hyde, could be very charming. And in our current environment that is all over the media right now with Nike and Mary Kane and Salazar and all that stuff that's going on, my story of my two coaches is very timely and very relevant to all that, because my first coach was just very domineering, very loud, very rude, just playing us all off against one another. And so I went through that. I was with him for 10 years, and I certainly learned from him. But it is kind of timely that, with all this discussion about coaches, I was one of the first to join him at the club and ended up being the last to probably still be trained by him.
Wow. I didn't realize that. Well, that name, Gordon Purry, is still kind of known today. I mean, he had enough, I guess I say reputation, but he was well known enough that I still am vaguely, familiar with that name even after all those years.
Yeah, he's passed away, and there was just a few years ago I got contacted by a British author who was writing a book about him, and I think that British author was expecting me to be extremely contribute positively to the book, and the author was actually quite surprised at actually what I said, but I was only telling the truth about my experiences with them.
The very best biographies that I've read really get into the character, and none of us are perfect. And they're not all a pat on the back for the character, but the best of them really get into the complexities and maybe what the person did have to offer and the things they went through. But yeah, so it's a complex thing. And you're so gracious because I know you had a lot of difficulty with him. So that's interesting right there. Your training started out just being you running on your own. Then you got a coach, and I'm sure that he probably pushed you, and you were with a lot of other athletes. And what I've read is that you didn't really consider your running training to be completely terrible or completely, almost too much to handle. You just loved running. Now,
yes, exactly. People have said, well, why did I stay with him as long as I did? Well, yes, I love to run. And to be honest, the atmosphere at the club was just wonderful. And I had so many friends in the training group. So it wasn't all negative at all. And as I said, I learned a great many things. And I think my personality was that I was just of the personality as I'm going to show you. So he could yell at me or just complain or criticize or whatever, and my personality was, well, I'm just going to show you. And so he made me very, very tough, where he actually beat a lot of his other athletes down. He actually made me, I think, very tough, or I just was tough to be able to handle him. And I achieved under him. I got 9th in the World Cross Country Championships at the age of 17. I got 9th the next time at 19. I went to my first Olympic Games at 20, and some more World Commonwealth Games and more World Cross Country before I left him. So he got me onto the world stage. There was obviously my talent got me there as well, because his training methods were not conducive to really peak performances. It was a lot of inconsistency in his training methods, and so that was the difference between him and my second coach. But he definitely got me onto the world stage. So it was definitely not a failure in terms of a partnership.
Yeah. I think coaching has evolved in quite a bit over the last decades, and you go back to Jim Ryan's original coach, who was either a Marine or a Marine DI, I don't remember, but he pretty much beat him up with the training. You know, he did.
Well, it's kind of like me sitting here in Indiana. My husband's an IU graduate, and of course I have watched Bob Knight coach at many IU basketball games.
Yeah.
And so, you know, seeing him and just understanding what he came from the military too, and he got IU to 5 national titles.
Yeah.
And yet there's a lot of controversy about the way he coached, but he was successful. And, you know, it didn't work out in the end at IU, but you can't criticize his success.
That's true. That's true. So I think what I find really fascinating is, everything I've read and watched and everything, is just what you just said, that you weren't really beat down by the verbal abuse so much. That you had it in yourself that made you tougher. And I just find that fascinating. That's wonderful. That's a gift probably as big as being able to run well. And your running form was actually something that you had in yourself beyond what even your coach could teach you.
I think so. It's easy to look back because people, always ask about the psychology. It's pretty tough to analyze yourself. I just truly love to run, wanted to be as good as I could possibly be, do everything possible to do that. And also, I had to travel the world at a very young age out in New Zealand. There's that too. I mean, there was a lot of incentives to run. I mean, to represent New Zealand, to go to Europe and run the track circuit, to go to cross country. I mean, when we left New Zealand, we just didn't go on a couple of days overnight to Europe. When you leave New Zealand and you go to compete in Europe, you have to go for 3 or 4 weeks because it's such a long journey, particularly back then. So here I am at the age of 17 going to Europe for 6 weeks to run cross country before the World Championships. I did that many times. Before I came to the United States at the age of 25, I traveled all over the world running. So there was that incentive too. Running was taking me out in New Zealand and showing me the world. Yeah. For free.
Yeah. Yeah.
For free.
Sure.
all I had to do was run well.
Right. So you qualified for 6 Olympic teams. Is that you qualified?
That's true. Yes, that's true. I actually qualified in 1972 in the 1500 meters. That was going to be the first year that the Olympics allowed the 1500 meters for women. Up until then, the 800 meters was the longest distance. So I ran the qualifying time for the New Zealand team, and I got chosen to go, but 10 out of the team with 3 weeks to go because New Zealand can't afford to send a very big team, and they considered I was too young to go, and so I didn't get to go in 72. And so in hindsight, that wasn't such a bad thing because the New Zealand team was housed on the same floor as the Israeli team, and if people know their history, the terrorists got into the Olympic Village and murdered the Israelis, and many New Zealand athletes witnessed that. So at age 16, that would have been a terrible thing for me to see. Probably never would have left the country again. So yes, and so then I got to go at age 20 to Montreal, qualified for Moscow, but Moscow, there was the boycott, and then raced the first Olympic women's marathon in 84, the first Olympic women's 10,000 meters in 88, and qualified for Barcelona in 92 and decided to retire instead.
Yeah. So you qualified in 92, you said?
Yes.
Wow.
In the marathon and the 10,000 meters, and I just decided to retire. I was 36 years old and I'd had enough.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
Which sounds terrible because I could have gone to another Olympics.
Yeah.
And I just said no.
Yeah, you already prepared, and it was just 2 races. Yeah. Yeah.
Uh-huh.
But what could you do to top what you'd already done?
That's true. And to be honest, the Olympic Games, they're pretty tough to go to from a small country because, unlike the United States team that gets treated so well, and they're pretty much rarely in the village, they're, housed up in a fancy hotel somewhere. Olympic villages can be pretty tough to be in and try and get enough rest and so it just makes it difficult.
Yeah. So what about your first Olympic? As I recall, if I have this correct, your first Olympics, you ran a record, a New Zealand record, and you came in last in the first qualifying heat.
That is true. I went to the Olympics, as I said, I was 20 years old. It was my first year of being an elementary school teacher, and I was New Zealand champion and record holder. I was chosen to run in the 800 and the 1500 meters. And so everyone in New Zealand thought they had this, great female star that was going to go away and do really, really well. And in that era, we had on the men's side in New Zealand, John Walker, Rod Dixon, and Dick Quacks, who were all going to be Olympic medalists, world record holders. And so they just thought, okay, here comes the young female that's going to go and do really well. And I lined up in the 800 meters, and I finished last in the heat. And I mean, you're just devastated. And so the team manager says, well, that's fine. You've got the 1500 meters now. And so I lined up in the 1500 meters and ran another New Zealand record, my best time, and didn't get out of the first round either. So I had to go back to New Zealand and figure out, well, what am I going to do? Because in New Zealand, I'm champion and I got my name and headlines, but, I got to go back to school teaching. Do I just give this up now? I'm not really as good as everybody thinks I am. I had to go through that. I had to think about that. But people said, well, you are young and, give it a shot. I mean, keep on going. So I kept on going.
And at some point there, you found a different coach. And New Zealand is interesting because they've had so many great athletes, and they have several famous coaches too. Arthur Lydiard is still studied, and was it Princey Saradi?
Yes, exactly. Well, so I spent another 4 years up to the 1980 Olympics with Gordon. But because of the boycott and because of a lot of other circumstances, I left him around August of 1980. And I actually quit the sport totally. I quit the sport. I wasn't going to run again. I quit teaching. I went and got a job cooking pancakes in a pancake parlor and ate too much of the product. And I just got completely out of shape. And people just said, you can't, I had no joy in running. And, finally somebody suggested I just should start again and get a new coach and just completely start over. So I actually asked John Davies, who was a bronze medalist in Tokyo in '64 in the men's 1500 meters behind Peter Snell of New Zealand, who got the gold. And I asked John because John had coached a lot of the New Zealand female runners that I had been racing against. So he had watched me all these years. And so I went to him and we talked, and he after saying yes, he actually told me that he wasn't too sure because he knew I came with a lot of baggage, but he knew I also had a lot of talent, and that I was going to be. He looked at me as a challenge, that I was going to be a big challenge for him to see. But his statement was that if I did everything that he asked me to do, that he thought I could get to the very top. Now, he was coached by Arthur Lydiard, so he coached with Arthur Lydiard's principles. So I was coached on Arthur Lydiard's principles.
So you started over with a coach that was actually good for starting over, because he probably was extensive with his base building time.
Exactly. He took me out. The first run that we went on together. Now remember, I am overweight and out of shape. I have not run for quite a few months. And he took me up to a forest north of Auckland, and we parked the car at a gate, and he said, "We are going to run for an hour and a half, and you're not going to stop. And I can't bring the car in here to come and get you, so we're going to make it." And so I had only ever run an hour under Gordon. I had never run any longer than an hour. So he was introducing me to the longer distance and the base building. And I remember us coming up a hill towards where the car was parked, and I was just so out of shape, but he refused to let me walk. So he's behind me, pushing me in my back to make sure that I keep on running up that hill. And but no, he was just completely topsy-turvy to Gordon. I mean, he had a plan. He would write it out for me.
Yeah.
Most of the time, it was 12 weeks long. I knew what I had to do every day, whereas under Gordon, you never knew from one day to the next what you were going to get told to do. And so the whole concept of knowing what your training's going to be, that you can mentally prepare for the workout versus turning up and it's a complete surprise, there's a big difference right there, is having a plan. And so that really suited my personality as well, is that, and particularly when eventually I came to the United States, John couldn't come with me. He was full-time employed in New Zealand. So I had to learn to train alone. And so to have that plan was very important. And so that's what really helped me, because he was never in the United States with me.
Yeah, so he introduced you, for one thing, that guessing all the time, or the stress of wondering, what's going to go on today, not very good for the nervous system, I don't think. And it's so much better for someone to know, there's a general plan, a general thing that's expected of me, and here I am in this part of the plan. And
well, there's also that you need the recovery days as well. And with Gordon, you could often do 3 days of really hard running in a row. And so that's why, so many athletes were injured under him. It was tough, because you were just worn out sometimes. Whereas with John, it was all, the recovery, the hard work, the base, the speed. It was all very carefully planned out. So that was hugely instrumental to actually my immediate success. My success with him was going from rock bottom, being overweight, to only being with him 6 weeks and making my 6th New Zealand cross-country team.
Wow. Yeah.
That's how quick it was, being overweight.
So I think, I hope people are listening to this, because these transition points in life are very interesting and very instructive, very helpful for people to listen to, I think. Sometimes we have to start over. I was in a situation once. I love to build houses. That there's something about that a lot of it I enjoyed. I enjoyed the physical activity, and I just enjoyed the idea of putting together a house. But then I got into another situation in which I was just treated completely differently. And finally, I couldn't even stand to look at a tool. And after a while, when that was behind me, then it was okay again. I was able to still enjoy what I really enjoy. But, there's moments where you have to start over.
Well, you're exactly right, because that's exactly what I did. And to this day, I will say that if I had not joined John Davies, you and I would not be having this conversation.
Yeah. Isn't that now?
It's as simple as that.
I was thinking about this yesterday, particularly, but how many times in our life have we needed help from other people? Starting with when you're first held as a baby, you can't do anything, and you had this home situation that was stable enough for you to develop some toughness. And even what I've seen, it was pretty supportive in developing that toughness, even while you were dealing with your first coach. your parents, you know, they were kind of, well, we can take them or leave them for a while if you're doing okay, all right. But,
Uh-huh.
yeah.
It actually was. I mean, my dad's comment was, well, he introduced me to sport. I mean, he would take me, he was a fan of horse racing, and he would take me to all the horse racing competitions. And so it was almost like I learned, he knew all the trainers. And so as a kid who couldn't run, I learned about running through racehorses and the training of racehorses.
Yeah.
There was that. And plus, he was a huge fan of cricket and rugby, and he would make me sit and listen to Muhammad Ali's fights on the radio. So he introduced me to sport as a daughter, but a daughter who couldn't play sport, but he was educating me on sport at a very, very young age. So I just knew all about sport. I knew what it took. I knew about training and coaching even before I was even involved. So that was a wonderful foundation I got at a very young age.
So you came to a low spot, then you found John Davies, and he began to rebuild you very quickly with your first hour and a half run, and no more out of shape for you. And then,
No.
but he provided a steady hand and got you going again. And then there's another low point where you can't really continue your career if it's not bringing you enough means to do that. And so you came to the United States, and at one point you won a race that paid you a significant amount of money. And then you got in trouble. Because,
well, I got myself in trouble. So I made that cross-country team, and it was March of 1981. And while I was at the World Cross Country in Madrid, Spain, Rod Dixon was on the team with me. Dick Quacks was already over in the United States coaching for Nike's club called Athletics West in Oregon, Eugene. And so they just said to me, Annie, the United States is opening up road racing for women and women being allowed to run the longer distances. We think that's where your strength is. You should go to the United States. You should go and run the road races. And so I flew instead of going back to New Zealand, I flew to the United States. And Dick Quacks got me into my first ever 10K race. It was New Orleans, the Crescent City Classic in New Orleans in April of 1981. And I'd never raced that distance in my life. And I turn up and I don't know what he'd told the organizers, but I got treated like royalty. And in the end, I found out he'd lied about what time I'd run for a 10K because I'd never run one. But to get me into the race, he'd lied. And so they thought I was a 34-minute 10K runner, and I'd never ever run one. But I caught on pretty quick that that's what might have happened. So anyway, I finished third behind Patty Catalano, who broke the American record that day, and Joan Benoit Samuelson, who was second. And I was third and ran 33 minutes and 18 seconds for my first ever 10K.
So
and
he lied. What did he say?
he lied because he told them I was 34. Well, everybody then said how I'd just broken my PR by over a minute. So I played along, but then I met Jeff Galloway and his wife who were there, and they invited me to ride a train back with them to Atlanta where they lived. And on the way, Jeff told me about how the sport was changing and how there was a group of athletes or coaches or race directors wanting the sport to go professional because they didn't like the under-the-table payments that were being made. And so I went to Eugene and got to kind of run with a lot of the athletes at Athletics West. Then I got invited to Denver, Colorado, by a guy called Cree Cowley, who was putting on local events in Denver. And he found me a couple to live with for a while in their basement. He paid me like $100 under the table just to kind of speak at his running store.
Wow.
So there's all this excitement about the sport and the road racing and women being able to run these distances. And then there was the story coming out that Phil Knight and Nike were going to put up $50,000 for a road race in Beaverton, Oregon, in Portland, Oregon, a 15K called the Cascade Runoff, and they were going to put up $50,000 equally split between men and women, $10,000 first prize, top 10, and try and encourage all of us to go with the understanding that if we accepted a check, there was going to be the Americans would get suspended, the foreigners would get banned. That was the International Amateur Athletic Rules of 1981. So everything was amateur. Track and field and the Olympic Games were amateur. And this was Phil Knight's way of trying to push track and field to go professional, which would encourage the Olympics to go to professional. And of course, he had his own mission, and that was to be able to sell more running shoes and have the athletes be sponsored and promote his running shoes. So he certainly had his platform, but it was an amazing thing that he did. And I went there thinking that if I finished in the top 5 or 6, I'd earn enough money to stay in the United States a little bit longer. But I ended up winning $10,000. And being a foreigner, I was immediately given an international ban. But the positive thing was that the race directors in the United States would not acknowledge my ban, and I continued to race the rest of the year in 1981, winning every single race. But then I was in trouble with immigration, and I got sent back to New Zealand and told not to come back to the United States until I had the right visa to allow me to run and earn money. So I went back to New Zealand as a banned athlete, not knowing how on earth I was going to get back to the United States again.
So that was another rather large difficulty for your career. But you did it. You got back. But
yeah, I did. I went back to New Zealand. The New Zealand Federation would not allow me. They didn't even want me to attend track and field meetings. Not only not allowed to race, they didn't want me even to attend them. I was such an outcast. And that was when John said to me, well, Annie, you're down here for 4 months. We don't know when you're getting back to the United States. We've got to have a goal while you're here. He says, why don't you attempt the world record in the 5,000 meters? And I said, well, John, I don't want to run track anymore, and I've never raced 5,000 meters. How on earth do you think I can break a world record? He says, I think you can. And Greta Weitz had just been down to New Zealand, and she'd attempted the world record in the 5,000 meters, and I'd watched her, and she missed it. And here, this is the great Greta Weitz, right?
Yep.
9-time world cross-country track, and I watched her miss it, and I said, why on earth do you think I can do it? He says, I think you can. Wow. So I spent that summer training because I was not allowed to race, and we set up a race that was not part of a meeting because I wasn't allowed to be part of a meet. So we set up a special world record attempt with 3 other girls in the race, and I went out and I broke the world 5,000 meter record on my first try. Wow. The first time I'd ever raced 5,000 meters, and I broke it by a second. But then the International Federation would not recognize it because I was a banned athlete. It took until I was reinstated about 8 months later for them to retroactively give me my world record plaque. So I did eventually get the plaque, yeah. But at the time I did it, they wouldn't acknowledge it.
Yeah, that was tough. But I'm glad they did give it to you eventually, yeah.
Yes, it's sitting right in front of me as we speak.
Wow. So that was another turning point. And then, so during that time when you couldn't get back to the United States, you had that for your goal. And that has certainly kept you in shape and even built up your belief a little bit more.
It certainly did. And then I did get back to the United States in April of 1982. And in 1982, I was completely unbeaten on the American circuit. I won every single race, and in every single race, I broke the course record.
Yeah. Every single one for the whole year.
Yes.
Wow.
Yes. I went unbeaten. So, yeah, and they were all course records.
What a story. So that's 1982 is the year that you won the gold medal in the Commonwealth Games. And when you went back to New Zealand to do that, was that, were you still banned there?
Yes, so it got to about, the British Commonwealth Games are 72 countries of the British Commonwealth. For people not knowing, it's Canada and all the United Kingdom and Australia and New Zealand and many of the African countries and the Caribbean countries. So there's 72 countries in the British Commonwealth, and the Commonwealth Games are held every 4 years. And this time they were going to be in Brisbane, Australia. And no New Zealand woman had ever won a track gold medal. So John starts working on me about July of 82, because they're going to be held in October of 82. And he starts working on me, and I said, John, I don't want to run track anymore. I'm done. I'm not coming all the way back to Australia. I'm not going to do it. And he kept on going. You can do it. I think you could win a gold medal, do it for your country, do it for your family. He just kept working on me. And I said, well, if you can prove to me that I can still do the training for a track 3,000 meters and still continue my road racing, then I'll do it. And then we're getting closer to the time, and I said, and I got chosen in the New Zealand team, but I was still banned. So even though I got chosen, nobody knew whether the ban was going to get lifted for me to be able to compete. And I flew all the way to Australia, still with the ban not being lifted, and everybody talking about me winning a gold medal. And so that was a lot of stress and pressure too, because first of all, I didn't know whether I was going to be able to run, and secondly, everyone was expecting gold and nothing else.
Yeah.
But it all worked out. The ban got lifted a week before I raced, so it was all good.
A lot of politics involved. That race was interesting because you kind of went against your coach's advice in that race. Is that? No, I'm
That's true. That's true, John. Because of the way he coached me, he gave me a lot of confidence. I always wanted to be a front runner. I never raced tactically. I just wanted to get out in front, and part of this is actually to do with my feet. I just wanted to be in control and run smoothly. I did not want to do the stop-start of an inconsistent pace. So I always was the pacemaker. I was always the front runner, and if I got beaten, I got beaten. So he knew that, but he also knew that going into this race, they made it a straight final of 24 women. And he knew that I was only 9th fastest in the field. And so he got nervous for me. And he came out onto the warm-up track and he said, now, Annie, he says, it's really windy in the stadium. It's really, really windy. He says, you got to promise me, don't lead the race today. He says, it's too windy. You're in good shape. You've got a good kick. Just wait it out. And so I go, in my mind, I'm thinking, well, he's never told me how to race all this time. But okay, so I go, okay, John. And he was going to be commentating for New Zealand television. And so in my mind, I go out on the warm-up track, and it's very windy down the back straight. And in the 3,000 meters, you line up on the 200-meter start over the other side of the track on a curve. And when you're going to line up on a curve, you all draw for your starting position on that curve. And I drew number 1, which meant I was right on the inside, which is the most dangerous spot to be. So anybody watching the film will see that the gun goes and I just take off really fast But it was really to get myself out of trouble, because if I got knocked off the track by the others coming in too fast, I would be disqualified. So I did it for safety factor, found myself out in front, knew what I had promised that I would not do, and he's commentating, and I'm just thinking, oh, Lord, I'm out in front. So I kind of slowed down a little, see if anyone would go past me, and no one would. So I kept on going and tried again to slow down, and no one would. And then in my mind, it was just like, damn, this is the way I like to run, so I'm just going for it. And I led from start to finish. And I became New Zealand's first female gold medalist, and to this day, still New Zealand's only female gold medalist.
Wow, I didn't realize that. So that's I've watched the race a couple times, and I did see that Wendy Smith was right on your shoulder there towards the last curve, and she tried to take that lead away from you, and you just wouldn't let her do it. And
well, that is the beauty of being in control. I mean, you can certainly get beaten, but you are the one in control. And I could hear her breathing behind me, and when we went into the wind, I sensed she wasn't quite as strong as what I was. Now, fast forward 4 years later at the Commonwealth Games in Edinburgh, Scotland, I ran the 10,000 meters against Liz McCoglin, and oh, sorry, this is a very loud black cat that people might hear in the background right now.
That's all right. That's all right.
Because Mummy's speaking to somebody else. So anyway, I did the same thing in Edinburgh. I led the 10,000 meters from start to finish, and Liz outdid me with about 300 meters to go and got the gold.
Yeah.
But that was fine. That was absolutely fine, because I ran how I wanted to run.
Yeah.
So, it was fine. She was better than me. I led. I did what I wanted to do. She did what Wendy couldn't 4 years earlier.
Yeah. Yeah. So you never know. So, excuse me. So, you actually are kind of you're definitely a pioneer. And what do you think about the attitudes? Was there more prejudice towards women being paid to run than it was towards men at the time? Or, Phil Knight actually has been instrumental in some social causes, even though, as you say, they do have an agenda as a company.
Well, with all this current, conversation that's going on about Nike, to be honest, my era was the 80s with them, and they were new, and it was very exciting, and they actually had women employed in the running division at Nike in the 80s. And so I just have so many friends from that era and have no criticism whatsoever of how I was treated at all. I mean, they custom made my shoes for me because I was very particular of what I put on my feet. Just got great friends to this day. And so it's a little sad for me to actually see the current situation and read all about it. But that's all happened since I was an athlete there. But it is, for those of us in the 80s, and we are having these conversations, for those of us in the 80s, with any of the shoe companies in the 80s, it was all new to all of us. It was new to the shoe companies too. I mean, the shoe companies built their business on the runners of the 80s. The road racers built their numbers on the elite runners of the 80s. And in some cases, that's all been forgotten. And now it's money talks.
Yeah.
And so those of us who did enjoy the 80s are very grateful we did have that decade. It was wonderful. There's not a single one of us that would complain about having been a road racer in the 80s. It was wonderful.
Yeah. So coming to the United States was really worked out well.
Yes, it did. Absolutely.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah. Absolutely.
So, since you said in 1992 you sort of drifted away from elite competition, or maybe didn't drift away. You just decided that was it for that part of your life, and that's pretty cool. You just made a decision and you had done what you wanted to do, but that's not the end of the story. And I believe that you've started one of the largest 5Ks in the U.S. Is that true?
I did, and I had to make a decision of whether I wanted to remain in the United States. I had my green card at that point, but I wasn't a citizen. I had to make a choice whether I stayed in the United States or I went back to New Zealand. And part of my reason for not going back to New Zealand was whenever I did go back, I went back every American winter to be able to train through the New Zealand summer, be with John and be coached and race track down there. And I didn't like the attention I got, and I shouldn't sound so rude about it, but I'm really actually a pretty private person, and when I went back to New Zealand, I just got recognized everywhere I went. And I'd be out training and people would pull up their cars beside me and want autographs for their kids, and that's all nice. And I mean, as I said, but I just actually like a quiet life. I think a lot of that had to do with my grandmother. And so I decided to stay. I based myself out of Boise, Idaho at that point. Boise was my American training base. I decided to stay there because no one knew me. I mean, I went out and trained there, but no one really knew who I was because all my races were done around the United States. They weren't in Boise. So I was able to be a private person in Boise. But then when I decided to stay, I got asked if I would start an event in Boise. And at that point, I thought, you know what? Yes, I will help, but I'm going to make it an all-women's race, because I realized that there were so many women of my age and older who were not participating, because I was 36 then, 37, that were not participating in the big road races. It was predominantly men and elite women. And I wanted to start an event that encompassed all women of all ages, shapes and sizes and abilities. So I founded a 5K for women, and I called it the Idaho Women's Fitness Celebration, where I told women I just wanted them to come out and go from A to B, start to finish over a 5K, and that I couldn't care less how fast they were, but if they understood that that was achievable, if they did that 4 times a week in their daily life, they would be so much healthier, mentally and physically. So that was the whole foundation. So in 1993, another lady and I put up our own money, because no one really believed in what we were doing, and Boise didn't have any big races. So we put up our own money, and we got 2,400 women to come out in Boise, Idaho in 1993 to do a 5K. 94 we doubled. 95 we had 9,000. And in 1997 we had 17,000 women. It was the largest event, largest 5K for women, or largest event for women in the nation. So that was only in 5 years. It was spectacular, and we had women, very obese women, women in their 90s do it. I mean, it was just all-encompassing, and I was very proud of it. Fast forward, I got married to a man from Indiana, so I had to kind of move to Indiana and manage an event long distance. So after 10 years, the nonprofit that was managing the event did a deal with the hospital, the big hospital in Boise. They took it over, and on the 20th year, it was only 8,000 women. And I was still involved through this time. But what had changed through those 10 years was that women had now realized that they could really easily be welcomed into any event in the nation, to the point where over 55% of participation in American road races were women. So the women weren't turning up to an all-women 5K anymore. they were out doing everything that I had wanted them to do. And so we turned it around, and it is now called Fit One Boise, and it's a 5K, 10K, and half marathon. It's for everybody, very, very family oriented. We're one of the few in the nation that allows the families come out with their strollers and scooters in the last wave. It's all encompassing again, but this time round it's family oriented, not just women oriented.
Yeah, so that's interesting from a number of standpoints. How did you tell people about the race the first year?
The first year?
Yeah.
Well, I would actually go to the mall with brochures, and I would walk up to women who were shopping, some of them older, some of them overweight, and I would just walk up to them and I said, would you like to come and do this? And they would go, and it was almost like I had a gun, holding a gun to them, like, no, I can't, I won't, no. And I'd say, well, do you know how far a 5K is? And they go, no. And I said, well, it's 3 miles. I can't do that. And I said, well, how long are you here at the mall for? And, a couple of hours. And I said, well, you're strolling from store to store? And they go, yes. And I said, well, a 5K is only going to take you about an hour. You can do it. And we got all these prizes. We got all these prizes, and it's going to be fun. And there's a party in the park afterwards. And that's how I did it. I just told them they could do it.
Wow.
You know, and we did it in waves, where if you wanted to compete and be timed, you entered the first wave. If you just wanted to walk along with your friends, you did the second and third wave. And if you wanted to push a stroller with your children, you were in the fourth wave. So they could choose what they wanted to do. And that kept the cost down because we didn't time everybody. We only timed the people up front who wanted to be timed.
Oh. So
yeah, tons of music and bands, and we just made it a big old party. And before they knew it, they'd walked, run, or strolled 5K.
Yeah. So there was a time when women were not allowed, say, to run a 5K or a 10K because it was felt that they were too weak to do that. And I mean, I didn't make that up. It's actually
it's true.
What people.
Oh yes.
And
I know. I think it's that truly in the 60s and 70s, if we ran, there were doctors that said our uteruses would fall out.
Yeah.
I mean, that's how silly it was.
Yeah.
So absolutely, that you shouldn't run. It's just bad for you all round.
And I noticed that you said that your first coach would actually taunt some of the runners taunt some of the male runners about maybe you would beat them.
Yeah, he would play me against them. He would, and you know, I was pretty talented and I could beat a lot of them. But his taunting was not right. And to be honest, it got to the point where my parents did not want me to continue to stay with him. Yeah. They didn't like him. A lot of the other parents didn't like him. But there was nowhere else for me to go at that time. And so we kind of all just stuck together and we understood. But yeah, he could just be really nasty.
Right. He was manipulating a cultural attitude that it was shameful to be beaten by a woman. And that persisted for a while. And and now if I get involved in a 50K or something and a female passes me, I'm not surprised.
I know. Look at that. Camille. What's the lady that's breaking all the...
Yeah.
My goodness. I mean, that's absolutely amazing what she's doing.
It is, yeah. But once you get the race long enough, it gets up in the 200-mile range. You don't know who's going to win.
That's being proved.
Yeah. And so that was a cultural attitude back then. And I'm fairly old, so I don't remember that attitude. but it's not there anymore. And so what you did in the 1980s with that race really was empowering women to get out there and do these things. But I'm so impressed that if that need wasn't there so much anymore, because now I'm not surprised at all. When I get in the world of ultra running, you're not surprised that something's absolutely equal to you or much better. It doesn't matter whether it's a man or a woman.
Yeah, and it's so nice. It's also so nice to see truly all the shapes and sizes of women out there. Not only the men, but they're all feeling comfortable now participating in a marathon and these distances. Is that it's wide open now. I mean, I often say that running and walking is the most cost-effective healthcare that we've all got for ourselves.
Yeah.
I mean, it really is, and it's so. All you need is a pair of shoes.
That's right, and it does so much for your psychology and your physiology and everything. Mm-hmm. And it is relatively simple if you don't live somewhere like Central Valley of California where you have to watch the air quality every day. But
oh well, we suffer with it too here in southern Indiana. Yeah. We're surrounded by coal plants, coal-fired power plants. I think we've got like 17 within 30 miles.
Yeah.
So,
wow.
Yeah, I couldn't be living. I tease my husband all the time. For someone like me, could not be living in a worse place. But it's his hometown. And he always shrugs and goes, well, what's not to like, Annie?
Well, we have to do something about that, but that's another issue. But I'm so impressed. The race that you started, you were able to see why the membership or why the attendance dropped off a little bit, because the culture had changed. It's not so necessary to tell women that they can do these things. They know now. And so now it's probably still a superb fundraiser for the hospital. And now it includes everybody. So
it's back up to 12,000, and for me, it's just wonderful to see the families. And I have always encouraged to let the younger kids do the 10K if they want to do the 10K and the half marathon with their parents, and they're just allowed to walk when they want to or just have fun with their family. I think we're one of the only events allowing that to happen as well. Wow. Not only the strollers, but actually allowing the youngsters to participate with their families.
Yeah.
So I think that's another thing that we're doing that's unique as well.
Yeah.
Because my whole philosophy is that kids in my era growing up would go out in the yards and run around the town and run around the other people's yards, and you'd be out running for 2 and 3 hours. And now they're telling these kids that they shouldn't be doing 10Ks and they shouldn't be, and I don't mean 5 and 6 year olds and that. Yeah. I'm meaning like 10, 11 and 12-year-olds. They can do it as long as you're not pushing them. Let them do it, let them do it.
I lived in a place once where the neighbor kid was 9 years old, and I would go out, and I wasn't very fast, but I loved to run. And so I would go out and jog these miles, and he started to tag along. And then I was doing 15 miles once, and he was in the car with my wife, and he would get out and run with me for a while, and then he'd get back in the car, and then he'd get out and run some more. And then
that's great.
In a few years, he was in the military leading all the runs. And I hope he still loves to run. I'd love to go see him soon. But not too long ago, I was watching a 12-year-old who was leading a cross-country race against all the senior high school girls. And she won the race at 12. Wow. So you never know. Yeah. As long as the kids enjoy it, great to get the whole family out there. So you've really been a champion for running itself.
Oh, well, thank you.
Yeah. So I think that you have spoken all over the country to motivate kids and others about running. Is that right?
Well, I've spoken to a lot of different audiences, and you can use my story in a very varied way depending on your audience. Mm-hmm. but the one I love most, obviously the school teacher in me comes out. And so all the years that I was with Nike and I went around the country racing, I would always go into a community ahead of time and go into the local schools and talk to all the kids. And so I've just spoken to thousands and thousands of kids all over the country. And I just use, depending on the age, I can do the, you know, the young ones and do it all in 30 minutes, or I can do the high school. And so depending on the age, I tailor the story. But I use it as life lessons. I just don't talk about running. In fact, I really don't talk a lot about so-called training or diet or anything like that. That's never really part of it. It's really telling the life lessons that come with my story,
Yeah.
and that's more important. And so yeah, I've done a lot of that. You know, I kind of get a little disappointed with my sport now because all these races are so big now. It's like they don't really welcome any of us with our past history, unless you're really a Bill Rogers or a Joan Benoit or you know, Frank Shorter. It's hard to get any of the events to really use us like they used us in the 80s. I mean, they would fly us in ahead of time, and we'd be committed to be standing at the expo and signing posters and giving out stuff to kids. And that's how all the races built their participants in the 80s. Now that they're so big at 20, 30, 40,000, they don't need any of us anymore. And I think that that's a sad thing about our sport, is that the powers that be in our sport are not doing a really good job of telling our history. And I'm not saying that just because of me, but you go back to that story of 1981 and that Cascade runoff. That race turned track and field in the Olympic Games professional, which allowed Michael Jordan and the Dream Team to compete in the Olympic Games. It was a small group of runners that did that. And that story is rarely, rarely told. And I just think that's just a shame. And that's on the powers that be in our sport, that we do not cultivate our history and tell our history. And that's just not because it's me. You think about all the stories that are there, particularly of the 80s and how the sport grew. It just seems like it's just been forgotten, or it's just not being told, you know.
Yeah, I think that's the way it is with history in general. I am much older with older than some of the kids I work with nowadays, and boy, they just do not know history. I was privileged to be a clinical instructor for a PTA student recently. I'm a PTA, and she was a great student, but she didn't know who Eisenhower was.
Oh.
And, I mean, that our kids' sense of history doesn't go back very far.
Well, and that's where, you know, for those of us who have immigrated, we have to learn all the American history to be able to pass all the tests. So there's some times that I come up against Americans and I know more than they do about the United States.
Well, our kids are not getting much history. That's for sure. They just don't know so many things.
Yeah.
They don't know how this country. They don't know the whole story of how this country was founded. They don't. Manifest Destiny. Never heard of it.
Wow.
Never heard of it.
They better wake up, because it's their future.
That's right. And that's why it's so good that you're out there talking to kids.
Mm-hmm.
Because there's our next generation. There's the ones that need to know. And so you've moved a little bit beyond. So the race is not asking for you very, very much anymore. But you're still, because you've moved into something that's relevant for everyone, even if they don't run, which is your personal story. And I'd like to ask you, when you were running, how did you set that up in advance that you would go into the schools and talk to kids? It's so hard to get into a school right now, you know, with all the fear.
It is, but it always helps that I've been a former teacher. That's a huge asset, because then the principal and the teachers know that you know how to communicate to kids. Plus, I would always make sure I got lots of testimonials from the previous schools that I could send ahead, and where there were recommendations of, by goodness, you do need this person to come and speak. She's really good. So it really does help, because there is a knack of being able to talk to kids and to tell a story to kids and keep them entertained for an hour, particularly at the high school level. And I had a lot of compliments that I could do that. So that's very helpful, having been a school teacher.
Yeah, it was helpful on a couple levels. One is, excuse me, one is that you had that experience with children and you knew what worked and didn't work with them. And then you had the experience with the administrators too. And so did you do phone calls ahead of time, or did you just walk into a school? How long did it take to set these talks up?
Well, I actually had somebody at Nike that would do it. They would call ahead, or it was the race director in the city where the race was.
Okay.
So the race director would often do it too, and say, this is our champion, or this is our elite athlete, this is who she is, and she's a school teacher, and she's prepared to go into these schools. Yeah. So the race director or the race personnel would often do it.
Yeah. Okay. So that's very interesting. So everything is connected.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. All right. So, Anne, is there anything else that you would like to tell people about your story, or what you're involved in now, or how they can contact you, or anything like that?
Well, I think the nice thing is that, I have a son-in-law that works in the tech industry, and he's created a nice new website for me, and so we're starting to put up interviews and pictures and race video. My documentary film is up on there, so it's all on the website now, which I'm proud of. So there's lots of great photographs, interviews, testimonials, my biography, and then the documentary film, which is Anne Audain Running Her Way. It's 50 minutes long, but it's pretty well done, and tells my story. So everything is on that website, and it's just AnneAudain.com.
AnneAudain.com, and you're thinking about republishing your book soon too, then?
I am, yes. I talked to my son-in-law after we spoke this week, and we are going to take a shot at it, yes, and get it up on Amazon again as an ebook, and we're looking into that. And that was after yours and my conversation earlier this week, is we'll take a shot at it, yes. Although right now I have some here at the house, and people can kind of email me about them, but yeah, we'll take a shot at that.
I'd like to hold up a copy of it. If we can wait just a second. Here we go. All right. Uncommon Dark. That's a great picture. So that's what it looks like. You want to watch for it, because if you have the files, you'll be able to get it out there soon. And, and such a pleasure to talk to you. Thank you.
Well, thank you for having me. I really appreciate it.
All right. So I'm going to go ahead and end the recording now, and I can send you the file if you'd like to put that on your website, or if you want it, I'll send you the file.
All right. Thank you. And do you have a Facebook page too?
I do. It's called the Aware Athlete Group on Facebook.
Okay, that's how maybe I found you, or that's how we. Anyway, if you put it up, just tag me too. So.
Okay.
All right.
All right.
All right. Well, you take care, and we can keep in touch.
Oh, I'd love to. Thank you.
Yes. All right.
All right.
Thanks so much.
Thank you. Bye.